Yeah, almost.
Oh, almost. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for logging on to this very different conversation. Usually, all the webinars are all about sales and markets and products. So this time, I thought I'll invite my friend Karan to talk on a very different subject, different topic. Very close to everyone's heart. And the discussion, or he would share his perspective on the issues which are around the Indo-China border issue. I think it's a very interesting topic. Uh, Karan doesn't need any introduction. I'm sure all of you know he's from our industry, and he's the privileged one to move on, and he's enjoying his life. He works out. He has a lot of coffee and some great pictures. He's very active on social media, so those who follow him probably know. But just to give a background, Karan has been about almost 25 years in our industry. His last assignment was with Axis AMC as Chief Marketing Officer. Prior to that, he's worked with Goldman Sachs, Franklin Templeton for many years, and I've had the privilege of working along with him at Birla Global Finance. So we had a connection there as well. To me, he's a mentor. He's a senior, a great friend. So thank you so much, Karan, for coming over and talking to our team out here. So we look forward to this great session. And guys, this is really very interesting topic. Any questions you can keep posting on the chat box or the Q&A box, and Karan will be more than happy to take all the questions. So over to you, Karan. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, Akhil, for doing two things, for being so effusive in your praise, and for allowing me to come and talk to your colleagues at MOSL, and thanks for putting this together.
It's our pleasure. Our pleasure.
And I think you use the right words, that this is an important topic. Sometimes while we speak about it on different forums, hear about it, etc., but we don't really spend too much time on it, simply because it seems as if it doesn't touch our lives. But actually, that's not the truth. It really touches our lives, because what I'm going to share with all of you, while it's a lot of maps and photographs, actually it's all economics. And at the end of it, that's the life, that's the world that you and me live in, which is the world of economics, finance, money. And so in the first whatever slides I take you all through, you may wonder, okay, why is Karan showing us so many maps? But remember one thing, at the end of it, it is about money and economics. So in many ways, everyone on this call can relate to finally what I'm getting at. So I'm going to stop here for a second, quickly get my slides. And all the slides I will show you are largely photos and maps. So there are two sections to what I'm going to present. The first section is, we've been in conflict for a while. So I just want to give a bit of a historical background. There's a little bit of a history why the conflict has been there. And in the second section of my talk, I'll try and explain why is the conflict erupted today in this manner. So between the two phases, I'll take you through the entire economics behind all of it. So just give me 30 seconds. I'll just start my screen.
Sure.
And if just one sec. And I'm assuming you all can see it. No worries. You can see it all. The slide, the pointer, and the slide.
Yes. Perfect, Karan. Perfect.
So let me just quickly dive.
Yes, Karan. It's visible. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot. So I'm going to straight dive into the slides. Like I said, two sections. The first section I'll cover on what is the historical background, what has been the conflict in the past few decades. And for that, I need the support of a lot of maps, and I'm going to dive straight into maps. So here comes the first map. There is no surprise here. It's my and your country, the country that we live in. We are all citizens of this beautiful nation called India, Bharat. Today, a lot of you are logging in from Bombay. I'm based in Delhi. I used to be in Bombay. Now I shifted to Delhi. Delhi has been my hometown. There are a couple of things I just wanted to share, which everyone is aware of, but about this great nation, but still, it's just very important to come together and put at least a common foundation on this nation called India. We are the only country in the world which has an ocean named after us. There is no country in the world which has an ocean named after us, the Indian Ocean. We are a country which is called the Indian subcontinent. I can't think of a country which is called subcontinent, and that is true because the size and shape and the entire, I mean, the geographical presence, the size of this nation is like that of a continent. And many times when I talk to people, I tell them that, we are actually more complex than Europe, because there are differences between France and Germany, but not that stark. But the difference between Uttar Pradesh and Karnataka is stark. And so much so that nowadays I pick up all these photographs, etc. There are so many photographs that are doing the rounds in social media that, if you start plotting states, Indian states, they are actually bigger than countries. For example, Gujarat is bigger than Italy, Uttar Pradesh is bigger than Brazil, etc., etc. So I think I'm just trying to, before I get into detail, I'm painting the picture that this nation that we live in is massive. It's got an ocean named after it. It's called a subcontinent, and it is complex. So it's not a very easy country. It is a complex nation. And it's all come together in the last, I mean, as a nation, we've only been independent 73 years. Independence has come to us in the last 73 years. Prior to that 73 years, 300 years British rule and 700 years of the Mughal era. So for practically 1,000 years, we've not had independence as a nation. It's only come in the last 73 years. So this independence is kind of vital to us, and it's critical for our existence over the next centuries. So with that background, I also want to share with you that today we'll spend a lot of time on this purple patch, Jammu and Kashmir, one of planet Earth's most beautiful places. I've been very fortunate to have lived there for 6 years. My dad was a fighter pilot. As a fighter pilot, he was commanding a squadron in Srinagar. And I've done a lot of my schooling in Jammu and Kashmir, I mean, in Srinagar. So a little bit of that background. I personally spent a lot of time out there. But today we will spend a bit more time into this purple patch, which is the most beautiful part on planet Earth. I also want to share with you two things about this nation. We are a nation which has had not too very friendly neighbors. We kind of fought wars with them, and I'll talk about it. We have two not very friendly neighbors. On the western flank is Pakistan, and on the eastern flank, today it is China. So why I said today it is China, because we must remember, it's very important to remember that we never had borders with China. And people don't tend to recognize or realize that we never had borders with China. We only used to have borders with Tibet, till China actually took over Tibet in 1959. So for centuries, India has had no borders with China. And for centuries, the borders have been very peaceful because we always had Tibet as a buffer. And once China took over Tibet, by force, our borders got altered. And from 59 onwards, we've been in this conflict. And I talk to you about two not very friendly neighbors with whom we've had wars. You'll be surprised to know that from our independence, from 47 till 2020, if I ask you to count the number of wars that we've already fought in these 70 years, 7 decades, if I ask you to just think of the wars that we've already fought, tell me how many do you think we've fought if you just put a number, and some very obvious numbers will come. But we've already fought 6 wars. 47, 62 with China, 65 with Pakistan. There's a very short war we fought with China again in 67, in which we defeated them. 71 with Pakistan, 99 Kargil. So we've already had 6 wars, and I'm not even taking into account some of the smaller skirmishes that we keep having. And in all of this, from 1984 till now, that is 35 years, we are actually fighting a battle every day at Siachen. So I just wanted to give a bit of a background that while the independence has come, we've already fought 6 wars with these two neighbors of ours. And now what I'll do is I'll keep talking about some of the wars and some of the results of those wars, etc. But as we go by, I'll cover it in subsequent slides. So with this background, let me come to the next slide. This is the map of a country that I'm not sure you've ever been to, or probably even if you try, visa aana thoda sa mushkil hai. This is Pakistan. This is what the map of Pakistan looks like, this entire thing. So you can see that this is our border, Jodhpur, Bikaner, Amritsar, etc. That's the border that we have with Pakistan. So this is what the Pakistan map looks like from northern areas down to Balochistan. I'm going to spend some time on the Pakistan map. थोड़ा important है because इसके बारे में आपको आगे जाके बहुत सुनने को मिलेगा. In fact, सुन भी रहे होंगे. But as you spend more time, you'll kind of keep hearing these words much more and names. But that's why I want to spend some time today also on this. The first name that I want to start with is this entire brown patch. ये इतना बड़ा brown patch that you can see, it's called Balochistan. Now, a lot of us as Indians, as Indian citizens, have obviously in the last few years been here. I mean, we probably knew what Balochistan is, but of late we've been hearing a lot more about it. Balochistan. Suddenly, the Prime Minister of India on one of those Independence Day speeches went and said on an Independence Day speech, that Baluchi hamare dost hain, etc. Now, suddenly out of the blue, this, Balochistan has started becoming known. It's getting more and more visible. A lot is being spoken about it. But I wanted to show you ये है कहाँ और इसका size देखिए कितना बड़ा है. It's pretty big. The thing is, Balochistan is a disputed area within Pakistan. At the time of independence in 1947, Balochistan was not supposed to be part of Pakistan. I don't want to get into details कि वो कैसे बन गया part of Pakistan, whether by hook or by crook, but it became a part of Pakistan. The Baluchis never considered themselves as Pakistanis. In fact, it was supposed to be a separate country altogether. So that's by way of a little bit of a history. So they've never integrated themselves into the Pakistani mainstream till date. Balochistan continues to be a center of massive dispute, etc. But it is one of the most mineral-rich states in the world, which is why it is so important. Along with Balochistan is Sindh, slightly lightish, pinkish area, pura Sindh hai. Even Sindh is disputed. Not to the extent of how Balochistan is disputed, but Balochistan and Sindh both are disputed areas. And both, if you look at the size of both of them, they're almost 50% of the size of Pakistan. And so you can see that 50% of Pakistan is kind of disputed area. Just wanted to share that with you. But a lot of our discussions also is about the core of Pakistan, which is Punjab. So this is the Punjab of Pakistan. And I wanted to show you today that ये जो आप dot देख रहे हैं, ये है Lahore, and this is Amritsar. This is Lahore, this is Amritsar. The distance at the closest point between Lahore and Amritsar can be as short as 50 kilometers. So basically बहुत similarities हैं, खाने की, पहनने की, बात करने के नजरिए की, जिस तरीके से the two are very, very similar. At least as you can see that there are a lot of commonalities, but the differences end there. The biggest thing with Pakistan Punjab, is this is the heart of Pakistan. This is where the entire defense establishment, the political establishment, the military establishment, the bureaucracy comes from the Pakistani Punjab. So this is like the heart of Pakistan. This is where virtually all the Sharifs, the Bajwas, the Musharrafs, जितने भी आप देखते हैं leadership, supposed leadership in Pakistan comes from Punjab. I just want to go up a little bit. As we just step up a little bit, you will see this yellow portion is called the NFWP, Northwest Frontier Province. ये इसका अगर मैं आपको closest example दूं कि NFWP क्या है, it's like the Wild West, it's like the Texas of Pakistan. यहाँ पे सिर्फ गन का राज चलता है, the Haqqani network वगैरह. So this yellow part is a bit of a gun raj, the gun rules in this part of Pakistan. But I want to also show you something else in the map of Pakistan. This is the political map of Pakistan, an area which you must have seen earlier, which is this, ये purple patch called the northern areas. और northern areas में आपको दिखेगा गिलगिट वगैरह वगैरह, but ये patch, ये जो आप पूरा purple patch देख रहे हैं और ये patch एकदम similar है. because they are the same. So Ek Desh is showing it in its own political map, this patch, and another country is also showing it in its political map. And so both are showing the same area. So ye hai kiska? So today, like I said, I'm going to just little bit go into the Jammu and Kashmir map, and it'll kind of give you an idea, okay, what is going on the ground. And remember at the start, I had said that everything from start to end finally has an economic implication. Finally is about money. Finally it is about economic power. So hear me out, and then you will gather what I'm trying to say. So these maps may not show you that there is an economic agenda out here, but I'll get you there. So ye hai kiska? Ye purple patch ye hai kiska? The reality for now, today, is this. So I'm going to just leave this map for you for 10 seconds. Please have a look at it. Then I'll explain it in great detail, or at least in a little more detail. This is the actual ground position of the Jammu and Kashmir map. I'll just leave it here for everyone to absorb for 10 seconds, then I'll explain it. Because there's a lot of green, there's a lot of red, and then there is white. So let's start with the white. जो आप actually white portion देख रहे हैं, this entire area, that is under Indian control for today. Not the entire green and not the entire red. So just to rephrase, of the entire map you see out here, today we don't have control out here, which is the green patch, and we don't control this, which is a red patch, which is what you're seeing exactly out here. We don't control this, we don't control Aksai Chin. For today, India administratively and militarily controls the white portion of the entire Jammu and Kashmir map. That's roughly 60% of the map is with India right now. Now I'm going to also now explain the other pieces. Ye green and red, ye hai kya? And how did that come through? So first of all, Kargil is out here on the line of control. It's very important to know kind of Kargil yahan hai aur yahan nahi hai. So it's you know, Kargil is not here. Kargil is actually here. This is the line of control. This part, green, that you see is Gilgit-Baltistan. This is another name that you will hear a lot going forward. Gilgit-Baltistan, again, something that has been referred to by the Prime Minister of this country, the Prime Minister of India very recently, that Gilgit-Baltistan hamara hai. And so much so that Amit Shah in the parliament actually said Aksai Chin bhi hamara hai. So suddenly the Indian government has been taking names and speaking in parliament and in the public about areas that we don't control yet. Aksai Chin and Gilgit-Baltistan. This green bit is not with us right now. It is militarily occupied by Kashmir, by Pakistan. It's called Gilgit-Baltistan. And this red part is what we lost to the Chinese in 1962, this Aksai Chin. Now, I want to just, since I spoke about lost, I want to just make it amply clear that Indian Army and its soldiers have been providing, have been going into battle from World War I, World War II, and the 6 battles I spoke about, 47, 62, 65, 67, 91, now in Siachen. There's only one war that we've ever lost, only one. So for all time in the last 100 years that the Indian Army soldier has gone into battle, there's only one that he lost, which is 62. And there is so much work that has gone into understanding 62. And people have now come to the final conclusion that 62 was a political blunder, not a military defeat. And just very basic, I don't want to get into details, but just to give an idea, today when you hear news, Rafales and the Indian Air Force, and we've got air-to-air surface missiles, we've got the Indian Navy all geared up, and then the Indian Army. In 62, you'll be shocked to know that the government at that point, along with the defense minister, had given strict instructions to the Indian Navy and to the Indian Air Force for no action at all. They were asked to stand down. And I'm repeating that. They were officially asked to stand down. So the only only arm that was allowed to fight was the Indian Army. Can you think of a scenario today in 2020 where the current government tells the Indian Army that only you will fight, but not the Indian Air Force, not the Indian Navy? This is exactly what happened in 1962, that they were not allowed to kind of go into battle. So 62 was a political disaster of the highest order, which is why we kind of lost that battle. But I'm just repeating this. It's very important for all of us to realize that that's the only battle we've ever lost. And it's told to us many times, 62 har gaye, 62 har gaye. So, look at the way it is replayed to us so that to remind us that we lost that battle. But then many things went wrong out there. So this is Aksai Chin. This is POK, Gilgit-Baltistan. Very strange thing happened out here. In 1963, just after the 62 battle happened, Pakistan, वैसे भी इसका है नहीं, it is an illegal occupier of POK. By definition, it is illegal occupation. What they did is, an illegal occupation ka part, which is this red part, it's called the Shaksgam Valley. They took this part and they gifted it to China in 63. So it was like a gift to the Chinese for fighting the 62 war. And the importance of the Shaksgam Valley, I'll explain to you in the next few slides. You'll see what has been playing in the last 60, 70 years. But very nicely, 62 में जो चीज पाकिस्तान की खुद की है भी नहीं, where they themselves are legally in a tough spot, they take that and they hand it over to Pakistan in 63. So, it's important to realize that what you're seeing today is not happening today. There's a long history to all of it. So what I'm going to do now next is expand this Jammu and Kashmir map little more to show you other parts. Where is Siachen, where is Shaksgam, and finally, what is the importance of all of this? Why am I showing you all of this? What is the economic implication? So let me get to the next slide. Now, this is a more detailed map of Jammu and Kashmir. It's very important for us to at least mentally make small notes, not कि कौन कहाँ पर है, but इसकी importance क्या है. I'm just going to show you. आपको याद है, this is the green bit which I showed you. This is the green bit. It's called Gilgit-Baltistan. Today it is controlled by Pakistan, and it's claimed by India. I showed you this green bit, which was gifted by Pakistan to China. This is the Shaksgam Valley. The importance of Shaksgam Valley is that it has over 225 glaciers. It has it's like a fountain of fresh water. The resources out there are phenomenal. 225, probably the only valley with so many glaciers is Shaksgam Valley. And that is why the Chinese wanted it in the 60s. So the Pakistanis gave it to them. Right under the Shaksgam Valley, if you see this triangle, ये जो triangle आप देख रहे हैं, this is the Siachen Glacier. So in 84, the Indian Army troops climbed 18,000, 20,000 feet and occupied Siachen Glacier. And many people wonder कि वहाँ पे क्यों बैठे हैं. Today I'll explain क्यों बैठे हैं. First of all, इसकी location देखिए. It is a triangle where we then share borders with China and with Pakistan. And this Siachen Glacier is the footstep to Shaksgam Valley and finally out here to Karakoram. So if you control Siachen, you get a toehold, you get access into Shaksgam, you get access into the Karakoram, which is why occupying Siachen is so critical for the Indian Army. Now let me explain the thing about Siachen. Siachen, your soldiers and our Indian Army soldiers and soldiers of this nation are occupying these heights at 20,000 feet. At 20,000 feet, the temperature is minus 40 degrees. So many of you on this call may have experienced zero. Probably if someone's traveled to Kashmir, maybe minus 5. And if you've traveled to the Scandinavian countries, you may have experienced minus 10. But I'm reasonably sure anyone on this call or no one on this call could have even imagined that human beings can survive, not just survive, they can fight a battle at minus 40. Those are the conditions in which the Indian Army has been occupying Siachen for the last 34 years. So and this is the only battle in the world. I mean, this is the only battleground at that height where a soldier is sitting. No other country has that kind of battle-hardened troops. So it's very important to remember that the Indian Army can operate in -40. It has operated. It is operating for the last 35 years. Soldiers out there don't die because of bullets. They die because of the extreme temperature. So -30, -35 can damage your body beyond belief. You can go mentally, you can lose your mental balance, hypoxia. I mean, many things can go wrong. A soldier is not allowed to be there for more than 3 months. So when the soldier goes for 3 months and when he comes back to, let's say, the plains, it takes the soldier at least 2 more years to acclimatize back to normal conditions. That's what it does to the body. And today I wanted to deliberately spend a bit of time on Siachen because हम लोग सुनते रहते हैं कि हाँ सियाचिन में हमारे soldiers हैं, but we don't realize the conditions that they are in. And we always believe इतनी ठंड है वहाँ रहने की जरूरत क्या है. The reason is because it has access to the Shaksgam Valley. It is a tri-junction between India, China, and Pakistan, and it gives us a toehold into the Karakoram. Strategically important. But what has also happened very recently is that India, if you can see this yellow big circle, the Indian Air Force has built the highest airport in the world called the Daulat Beg Oldi. It's actually operationalized it. So people could not, putting troops, if you send a troop, when you send, let's say, a platoon out there, that is understandable. Chalo, theek hai. And then, choppers go and deliver food and packets, etc. But to make an airport at that height was unimaginable. That's an engineering feat. And then for pilots to land at those heights has never happened. Again, this has been a first for any country in the world where an airfield has been operationalized at those heights. So our C-17 Globemasters, IL-76 Gajraj, these massive transport aircrafts of the Indian Air Force are now landing at Daulat Beg Oldi and are now providing logistical support to all the soldiers out here. So now I'm going to just paint this entire picture so that it becomes clearer as to what is irking the Chinese and what is the issue. Like I said, Siachen has always irked them. Then we built an airport right here to provide the logistics. What we've done now in the last 4 years is not just build the airport. Actually, the Indian Army has now built a highway. It's a strategic highway, which you can see this red dotted line. This entire highway from Ladakh has been built, ready, and it covers all the way to Daulat Beg Oldi. So this highway allows heavy equipment to travel, for example, tanks and military vehicles, etc. And all of this has been built in the last 4 years. So not only is the airport ready, but a highway to provide logistical support right till Ladakh has also got operationalized. And I want to share with everyone today on this call that a war is never won by bullets. It's always won or lost on the basis of logistics. It is logistics which defines the win and loss of a battle. For example, when you step out for an NFO, I'll talk in the language that, mutual fund guys will understand. If you go into an NFO, let's consider an NFO as like a attempt for raising money. And in the NFO, you don't have the forms. So tomorrow product can be the very best in the world. You can have the best fund managers running the fund. But if you don't have the most basic thing like forms hi khatam ho gaye, which is exactly what happened in the Morgan Stanley era, right in the 1990s, when the forms were being sold on a premium. So if you don't have the form and if you don't have the distribution points, your fund actually then is of no use because people can't buy it. I mean, exactly the same thing when it comes to war and battle. You can have the best tanks, but if the tank doesn't get petrol, and you can have the best soldiers, but if the soldier doesn't get the bullet or the water to keep him going, then that soldier is of no use. And India has built this entire strategic highway in the last 5 years, which passes through Galwan Valley. And Galwan Valley, we heard of what happened on the night of August. It passes through hot springs, names that now you'll be familiar with, and end at Ladakh. So you can see that suddenly in the last 6-7 years, the Indian establishment, whether political or military, is busy constructing highways and creating strategic roads, which is now helping connect the entire defense establishment of this country. So this highway is ready. The Daulat Beg Oldie Airport is operational, and it is supplying all of logistics to Siachen soldiers. So this is what I wanted to just, the Galwan Valley is something I want to talk to you on this point. On the night of, and we'll cover it later as to why the soldiers, why are the Chinese here. We'll talk about it, but I want to spend a minute on Galwan. The night on which we lost 20 soldiers at Galwan Valley, that night, after the first 1 hour of battle, the Indian troops known as Ghatak, the Ghatak troops, which is like the most battle-hardened tip of the spear, went back into that area. And by many reports, it seems as if between 55 to 65 Chinese soldiers and officers were killed. Now, for the first time in the history of the two countries from 62, a retaliation of this sort has never been seen. So while we lost 20 soldiers, but the Chinese were not ready to accept or get this kind of serious backlash. That night actually changed the entire thought process, both in India and in China. And probably aage jaake I'll speak a little bit more about it, but that single night changed the narrative very, very strongly. The Indian army accepted the deaths of 20 soldiers. The Chinese have still not even accepted that they've had casualties. And that is the difference between two armies. An army that is not even willing to concede or accept that they've had a loss probably will find it very tough to fight a battle. And so the world has changed in that sense, and I'll talk about it a bit more. So just leaving the map out here for a bit, again showing you that this is Kargil, Daulat Beg Oldie. This is where the Siachen Glacier is, Shaksgam, and currently Gilgit-Baltistan, run by Pakistan, and Aksai Chin. This is Aksai Chin, the area that we lost. And again, please remember, Amit Shah spoke about getting back Aksai Chin in the parliament, and Prime Minister Modi has said Gilgit-Baltistan hamara hai. All of this in the public domain. Nothing that I'm blurting out is known only to me. It's just out there in the public. So let me go to the next slide. Very often people tend to think that our battles with China are actually only out here in Ladakh, which is which is what I've been showing you right here. Paisa nahi hai. We are in confrontation with China on three fronts. This western sector, there is the eastern sector, a central sector, and then there is the eastern sector. So let me explain. ये है western जो कि मैंने पूरा आपको दिखाया अभी, the entire Ladakh, Aksai Chin area. But there's also boundaries that we share with China on very small boundary, which is in Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh. So it's only 545. ये थोड़ा peaceful है, मगर आज की डेट में यहाँ पे भी confrontation थोड़ा बहुत, I won't say confrontation, but little troops have come eyeball to eyeball. And the third, the most critical is actually eastern sector. From the Chinese point of view, they look at Arunachal Pradesh as South Tibet. And for them, Arunachal is South Tibet. Of course, from an Indian point of view, Arunachal Pradesh is an integral part of India. It's a state. Even today, if politicians go to Arunachal Pradesh, the Chinese actually write about it, saying that you're not allowed to go. Can you imagine? That's the way it's looked at. And by the way, all of this is Tibet. So they've always Chinese consider it as South Tibet. And so today we are in a confrontation there as well. So it's in three different areas. Next slide. I want to take you to, since we went into Pakistan, why not spend some time in China as well? So this is the Chinese map, and I've made a very simplistic map out here. I mean, at least just picked it out in a very simplistic way. Show you the three pieces of China. China is actually culmination of three pieces. This is the actual China. ये जो आप पूरा dotted line यहाँ तक देख रहे हैं ना, ये पूरा proper China. This is where they've not really annexed any country. And you can see most of China, whether it's Macau, Hong Kong, Guangzhou, Nanjing, most of China is around the seabed, eastern seaboard. And that's very obvious because most cities in the world are actually built around their waterways. So you can see that it's very obvious. Shanghai, so Yellow Sea, East China Sea, जितने भी आप देख रहे हैं, Yellow East, most Chinese cities are present around the eastern seaboard. And outside of this, Tibet was annexed, and so was Mongolia. So Inner Mongolia was taken over by China and Tibet. So finally, if you put China together, it's a culmination of three countries: Tibet, Inner Mongolia, and China. And that's how they've become this massive so-called country. And like I said, up until 1959, we actually didn't have any border with China. And it's been a very peaceful 3-4 centuries, because the Indian, if you look at our history, the Tibetan monks and the Indian, let's say the Hindu pujaris and the Tibetan monks never actually had any clashes. In written history, there is no clash till the Chinese came into Tibet. And so this is the eastern seaboard, which is where most cities of China actually are based. But I want to show you something very interesting, that Yellow Sea, East China Sea, etc. That is true. But now start seeing the countries around China. South Korea, problem with China. Japan, China has a problem with Japan. Taiwan, China has a problem with Taiwan. Vietnam, China has a problem with Vietnam. Philippines, China has a problem. I can go on and on and on. There are 16 countries in and around this area that the Chinese have issues with. It's not just India. And so there is something fundamentally going on out there, where with South Korea, they have issues. With Japan, they have issues. Taiwan, they think is their own. Hong Kong, now they have issues with. So you can see that this current Chinese establishment clearly has issues dealing with the world. And maybe in the question and answer session, when the question does come up, I will answer the reasons why. But today I just wanted to lay for all of you that even in the neighborhood, they have issues with 16 countries. So this is China for you, and we'll talk about it during Q&A. And now what I'm going to show you is a section that starts covering some of the economic reasons as to why this is happening. Why are the Chinese doing, or why have they done this in the past? Taken on pangas with India, taken on pangas with the rest of the world. So ye thoda sa, now the background will start to emerge ki ye kiya kyun hai. So let me just get into the slides now. This is a slide I picked out from Google, and it's a very beautiful slide because it shows India inverted. People think कि मैंने उल्टा ही लगा दिया. That is not true. This is an inverted map of India, and inverted you will see the vastness of the ocean. Look how vast the ocean is, versus there is a land mass that we need to cover, but look at this. And it's true, the country that rules the seas rules the world, and that is true for the last 7-8 centuries. Today, the country that rules the oceans, rules the seas, is actually the United States, which is what makes it a superpower in the world. Of course, they are economically powerful, but the fact of the matter is that they have the most powerful navy in the world right now. Gives them access to the entire world. Prior to that, it was the British. So the sun never kind of set down on the British Empire, because the British Navy actually had complete control over the oceans. The Spanish Armada, the Portuguese. And so if you look at the world, the way the world has come through, any country that rules the seas actually rules the world. And now you will start to see what I'm saying. So to rule the world, you have to rule the seas. And it's quite obvious that even for India, while the borders are very large with China and Pakistan, actually it's the presence of the seas. Let me show you next slide why this is important. What you see now looks a little complicated, but I'll explain it to you and you will easily understand. what I wanted to show you first just focus on these, if you can see my pointer, just focus on these red stars. This is the Chinese flag. I want you to just focus on the Chinese flag starting from number 1. Look for number 1, 987654321. Let's start with this. What I'm going to explain to you is infrastructure that has been built by the Chinese from 1995 onwards. It's now taken 20-25 years to build this infrastructure. Officially, there is no word for it, but Western researchers and researchers who studied this call it the string of pearls. Every dot, every map you actually see is like a pearl that the Chinese have strung together in the oceans and in the seas. And I'll explain to you what this is. From here onwards, the economic impact will start getting clearer. And these pearls have been put together in the last 20 years. So what are these pearls? Why are they important? What is their economic ramification? I'll explain now. So this entire area, by the way, is the South China Sea, East China Sea, the Yellow Sea. And China in the last 25 years has been putting these pearls. What are these pearls? These pearls are either naval bases or these are operationalized airfields on islands. So they've literally been militarizing small islands or places that they've just gone and occupied. For example, they're in dispute with Japanese on the Senkaku Islands. They say that that is theirs. So while no development has happened on those Senkaku Islands, neither by Japan nor by China, but similar such islands have been used by China in around South China Sea and East China Sea to build military defense, let's say military airports, naval ports, and other establishments. So you can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, all of till 6. The entire South China, East China Sea has been strung together. And so in many ways, that's heavily militarized. And so say 15, 16 countries that they are in conflict with actually are kind of hemmed in because the Chinese have built military infrastructure to corner them. As you come into 7, 8, 9, you'll notice that even Myanmar, they built a military establishment. Until a few years ago in 9, in Bangladesh, there was a presence. So was there in 10, which is Sri Lanka, and came out here right under our noses, and 12th. Now I'm going to explain 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, because this starts coming in the strategic zone for India. I can understand this has gone in many ways, ye to cover ho gaya, but this is the Indian Ocean region. It's called the IOR. This is where the Indian Navy has strategic impact. This is where if anything happens, it has a direct correlation and a direct impact on the security of our own nation. 7 years ago or 8 years ago, the Chinese started building in Bangladesh submarine docking facilities, port facilities. As we speak today, those projects have been stopped. File was roughly about, in the previous Rajapaksa government, about 6 years ago, Sri Lanka gave away infrastructure development to China and gave away a port called the Hanbantota port to the Chinese. As we speak, in the current Rajapaksa government, that port facility has been denied back to China. And this 12th is the only one that still exists in our region. It's called the Gwadar port, and Gwadar is in Balochistan. So what I want to do today is just spend a bit more time here, that while the pearls were built in the last 25 years, and they started coming in our own region, but in the last 5 years, because of foreign policy, etc., and we can talk about that later, that these pearls, Sri Lanka in the current Rajapaksa government, literally the Rajapaksa government has just come back again 6 months ago. They've denied any access to the Chinese for further construction. The Bangladeshi government today has denied or has given no access to the Chinese for building further infrastructure. That's all stopped. Burma, Myanmar has stopped actually all construction with China, given starting to give more projects back to India. And India, on the other side, has a very serious presence, naval presence. The Indian Navy has serious presence in the Indian Ocean region, so much so that in the last 2 years, in Car Nicobar, we've got a very, very powerful, what I would call as listening capability, which is like keeping an eye out on the region. And we've actually posted a squadron of Sukhoi 30s out there at Car Nicobar. Plus, if you noticed, I don't know if you've heard about this, but very recently, between Chennai and Car Nicobar, this entire internet cable facilities have just been put. 35,000 crores has been allocated to Andaman and Nicobar for development. The reason I'm showing you all of this is to share with you that while the Chinese have been building heavy military presence in this area 25 years, they did that right under our noses as well. But in the last 5 years, some of those pearls have been removed, and rightly so, because that comes right under our noses. In fact, ulta ho gaya. Not only have we plucked out the pearls, we built our own out here. And this is important. In the next few slides, you'll notice why this is important. This, like I showed you, is like, please consider this like a maritime highway. This is like a highway for moving trade. But on the same side, the Chinese have built the BRI, which goes right into Europe, Turkey, passes through our head, Shaksgam, Karakorum. You will remember all of these because I spoke about it, and then goes straight into Beijing. Now we come into the economic impact of everything that I've been trying to share with you, because now it starts talking about infrastructure, money, land, and sea routes. So now from here onwards, you'll realize as to why the Chinese are at loggerheads with us and with many parts of the world. So you can see that the BRI has been built, or its final construction is happening, and this is a highway. Obviously, the pet project of Xi Jinping. About 160 or 63 countries have signed the BRI. 163 countries are signatories. The only country that has not signed the BRI is India. And that's really irked the Chinese. Obviously, we cannot sign the BRI because parts of the highway cross through our area, which is Gilgit-Baltistan, Karakorum, Shaksgam Valley. Now, if you say that I'm party to this infrastructure, what you're really saying is that the infrastructure that has been built by the Chinese does not pass through sovereign land of India. By signing BRI, you actually say, ye mera nahi hai. So clearly India could not have signed that. We didn't sign the BRI. We didn't sign the REPC agreement. We've actually built more infrastructure around the border areas. All of this starting to irk the Chinese. But what I want to show you is something else, is this. Like I said, sea routes, and which is where the economic angle starts to kick in. I showed you all these pearls that the Chinese have started putting in. There's a reason why they put the pearls, so that they have military presence. Why would they want military presence? The reason is this. Now, what I'm going to show you is a very simple sea route. It's like if you put on Google Map and want to travel by sea on an oil tanker. And please remember oil tanker, because for China and as is for India, the number one raw material that both use for their survival, for their entire economic activity, is oil. This red line that you see is a route that an oil tanker will take if it wants to go from a port, let's say in Guangzhou or Shanghai. This is the route it will take, pass through South China Sea, go into Malacca, cross Malaysia. This, by the way, is Malacca Straits. Is a god of traffic jams on the seas. You can see kitna patla hai yahan pe area. It is like the Lower Parel Bridge of the world. Yahan pe 70% of the world's trade passes through Malacca Straits and is heavily traffic jammed. Then the oil tanker gets out of Malacca Straits, to chalo wahan se to nikla, fir comes into Bay of Bengal and gets straight into our zone, the Indian Ocean region. So a simple oil tanker, which is getting oil for China from Shanghai to Middle East, travels this route, and it has to pass through two very, very sensitive areas. One, the Indian Ocean region, Because if there was any conflict with India, India with its naval presence, can block the sea route out. India can block the sea route out. On top of it, this oil tanker also has to cross through Malacca Straits, which is heavily traffic jammed. So two very, very sensitive areas. Then you get into the Arabian Sea, and then the oil tanker goes into Kuwait, picks the oil, comes back, same route. First of all, I want you to visualize this, and then tell me and just think aloud, how long is this by kilometers? This entire journey. It's 13,000 kilometers one way. There's 26,000 kilometers for completing a journey. So the tanker goes and comes back. It's 26,000 kilometers. And on top of it, it has to pass through two very sensitive areas. Indian Ocean region, our area of our strategic area, where there can be a blockade. And then it has to pass through Malacca Straits, where again there can be a blockade because many other navies are present there. So if the Chinese can be blocked out on two such very, very critical places, then their access to oil is questionable. So they thought of an alternative. Let me show you the alternative. The alternative is get the oil from Kuwait, get it only 100 kilometers away, park it at a port called Gwadar. Let's call the port Gwadar. Let's make it in Balochistan, the Chinese thought process. Then why don't we do one thing? Why don't we build a complete corridor, economic corridor, highways and pipelines right through Pakistan, end it in Gilgit-Baltistan, which fine, it is Pakistan, it is POK for now. Let's just build the entire highway passing right through Pakistan, end it at Gilgit, Kashgar. It probably is disputed, no problem, we'll think of it later. So instead of doing this, the Chinese thought, why don't we do this? Now the thought has become reality, and nothing I'm telling you right now is fantasy. By the way, the Gwadar port is ready. It is operationalized. It is now manned and run by the Chinese. And this entire green highway pipeline infrastructure is the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. It is a $50 billion investment. They've literally invested that money and they've made Pakistan like a biggest debtor in the world. This entire infrastructure has come through. What the Chinese want to do is this. Instead of this entire 13,000 kilometers, they just want to get the oil to Gwadar and run it through here, end it at Kashgar. Kashgar is under Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So the travel time comes down from 13,000 to 2,000 kilometers. So I'm just going to repeat this. If they don't do this and just build infrastructure which is ready, what it really does, now you need to start wearing your investment economic hats to figure out what the Chinese are up to. So instead of doing this entire rigmarole, the Chinese want to do is just cut this and go here. Now, funnily enough, what has happened is, which is quite known, that this entire infrastructure passes through three disputed areas. Gwadar, which in itself is disputed because of Balochistan, and ends at Gilgit-Baltistan, which actually is legally Indian territory. So while the entire CPEC passes through three very disputed areas, yet the Chinese have gone and built it with an investment of $50 billion. Now I want to show you something that 13,000 kilometers comes down to 2,000 kilometers and travel time of 45 days comes down to 10 days. So if you do this route, sea route, it's 45 days. But if you do the land route, it's 10 days. Simple question. At what cost will you protect an investment which is worth $50 billion, but has the potential to kind of add revenues to the extent of $500 billion over the next 7 years? Now, everything I'm talking now is economics. From here onwards, everything is money, finance, hard cash. The entire infrastructure that has been built such that there is a security of the $50 billion investment. I'm asking a very simple question. At what cost will you secure your $50 billion investment? And the answer that I always get is at any cost, because this is not about the $50 billion which has been invested. It is an expected return of $500 billion over the next 7 years. And that's very obvious because actually logistical costs are down 1/3. So you have so many private, high net worth businessmen or clients of yours. I mean, it doesn't take rocket science that if your travel time is down from 13,000 down to 2,000 kilometers, and if it's down from 45 days to 10 days, it doesn't take rocket science to realize that if the logistics costs are down 1/3, you don't really need to do more. You'll actually make much more money. So the question to ask is, it passes through three disputed areas. At what cost will you protect it? And the answer is at any cost. And I now come to the fundamental fact that Kashmir, the Jammu and Kashmir issue is not religious, neither is it political. It is purely economic, because it has been the perfect smokescreen to keep the Indian diaspora, the Indian establishment so occupied in dealing with Kashmir that we never ask the question कि ये तीन हमारा है. So the Kashmir issue has been kept on boil for the last 30 years, 35 years, while this entire infrastructure was building, such that we never even questioned कि Gilgit अपना है, Baltistan अपना है, Kashgar हमारा है, हमको चाहिए, Aksai Chin हमारा है. Now, when you start questioning all of this, that's when the infrastructure comes under pressure. But till now, we were so busy dealing with Kashmir, whether it was terrorism out there, whether it was upheaval. I mean, you've seen what has happened in the last 30, 35 years, that the Indian diaspora has just been involved. And the perfect foil was that the Chinese actually used Pakistan to keep India totally occupied with Kashmir. What I'm going to actually share with you today is this. Pakistan is no longer a country. It has become the 24th province of China. They are an immaterial, irrelevant country. And unfortunately, India was always hyphenated with Pakistan, Indo-Pak. So we became so messed up in our heads dealing with them that we didn't even realize that the real challenge for us is China. And only in the last 6 years, what is now happening is that India started making claims on territories and areas which we should have always made a claim on. And once you started doing that, you've actually touched the sensitive portions and got the Chinese involved. What you'll notice in the last 6 months is that there is no dialogue about Indo-Pak. That's become history. It's all become Indo-China. Now we are hyphenated with the right power, with the right set of people whom we should actually be competing against. And because we are now asking the right questions, कि Gilgit अपना है, Baltistan अपना है, POK अपना है, Aksai Chin अपना है, and suddenly that entire infrastructure is being questioned. And it is about a $500 billion. So if you start questioning all of that, that entire infrastructure comes under doubt. And that has been the history of the last 25, 30 years. Keep India so occupied that we never ask the right question. Now that we've started asking the right questions, it's irking the Chinese. Now, what I'm going to do very quickly in the next 10 minutes is try and explain to you, why are they here today? What has happened that they've just come right into, why are the Indian and the Chinese literally on the verge of a kinetic battle? It'll take me about 10, 12 minutes to quickly 10, 12 minutes to finish that section. After that, I'll open it up to Q&A. So this is the first part. And the whole thing is about infrastructure for raw material, and raw material gets cut down by 1/3. Unfortunately, that entire infrastructure goes through disputed areas, and now India is asking for that disputed area back. So Pakistan actually is no longer a country, it's just a province. You'd be surprised to know that Karachi Stock Exchange ownership, 40% of Karachi Stock Exchange is owned by Chinese. Not many people know this, but basically it's just another, आप उसको एक छोटा province मान लो. And I'm going to say this with full responsibility, that it's an irrelevant, immaterial country, and it is a useless exercise for India to put itself and peg itself with Pakistan. It is irrelevant. So I'm just going to show you the next few slides as to why are the Chinese here today. The current conflict actually is not for land, it is water wars. And this has been building for many, many decades, but something has happened very recently. And I'll try and decode that for you as to why the Chinese and us आज suddenly लड़ाई क्यों चालू हो गई है. You can always say कि गिलगिट अपना है, बाल्टिस्तान अपना है, that is fine. And you can 370 हटा दिया, etc. etc. But आज की लड़ाई शायद land के लिए नहीं है, it is water. And give me 12 minutes, 13 minutes, I'll explain. What is it? From here onwards, what I'm going to explain to you may sound like a James Bond movie, but again, all of this is real. I'm sure at the end of it, you'll kind of realize कि हाँ थोड़ा picture type है, मगर कहानी में सच्चाई है. And here goes. In 2016, November, the US was doing a trial run for one of the most sophisticated destroyers ever built. The class is called USS Zumwalt. It's called the Zumwalt class, and just from the photo you will see कि ये कितना sophisticated है. You can't. This is stealth technology. You cannot it cannot be detected, etc. And even the missile technology on the USS Zumwalt is extremely sophisticated. It took $5 billion to make this warship, American warship. And it went into sea trials, and then it was passing through the Panama Canal and it broke down. When I say broke down, I'm using very simple language, but just for everyone, for all of us to be on the same page. When I say breakdown, its jet propulsion system broke down. By jet propulsion, matlab, that entire jet propulsion system broke down. It halted the ship, and this massive $5 billion whatever warship that was built just stood in the middle of the Panama Canal in November 2016. Same time, 3 days ago, a completely new sophisticated British destroyer called the HMS Duncan also broke down just as it was leaving the port, and it too suffered from jet propulsion failure. Now, what I'm going to share with all of you has been researched by some very heavy hitters on this topic, people like Maruf Raza, Iqbal Malhotra, and this is all parts of this is not in the public domain, but finally a lot of it is in the public domain. But it's important for me to share this. I'm going to repeat this. 2 very sophisticated warships, one American and one British, within 3 days of each other in 2016 doing sea trials, completely broke down because of jet propulsion failure. Now I want to explain this to you why this is impossible to happen till it was not in some form attacked. Now the ships are still there. Like, it's not as if they broke down, like physically broke down. The ships were not attacked by missile, but they were attacked. Let me give you an example. When we fly in an aircraft, there is a backup to a backup to a backup, such that there is virtually nothing can go wrong while we are flying. Same is the case with warships. There's a backup to a backup to a backup, and yet something went wrong, and that too within 3 days of each other for 2 different warships, very sophisticated. What was that? What they realized is that the Defense Department in both the countries did tremendous amount of audit, research, matlab backtesting in our language, backtesting kiya कि हुआ क्या, कि matlab how can we lose 2 warships like this? And they figured out that they were under attack. What was the attack? The attack was an electromagnetic pulse. EMP is a term which is used for a high burst of energy, and the target that you target, whatever is the target on that high burst of energy, completely melts down. So these are technical terms, but very simplistically put, EMP is a high burst of energy, and the target of that burst completely melts down. In this case, there was an EMP attack, a high burst of energy attack on the microchips and the circuitry of these warships. Now, you can only be attacked if the circuitry that has been put, the microchips and the circuitry that has been put, has a backdoor entry, which basically means, one sec, let me explain this. This is an Apple phone, and it has circuitry, it has microchips, but the microchips are strong enough to withstand heat, temperature, etc. But if there is a single microchip which is weak, that gets attacked by temperature or by a pulse, it'll blow up the entire phone. And this is exactly what happened, that the Chinese had hacked into the systems. They had made a hack into the systems of the Defense Department. They were able to plant very weak microchips which could not withstand a electromagnetic pulse attack. And when the Americans and the British did tremendous amount of audit, they figured out that both the ships had come under an EMP attack. Both the ships suffered jet propulsion failure. By not firing a single missile or a bomb or getting into a battle, the Americans were attacked. Now, the result was, you can see that tremendous amount of work was done to figure out how has the infiltration happened. And remember, all of this has to tie in as to why are the Chinese in our backyard. So somewhere I have to tie this in. But the story begins like this. And please read this one article by Bloomberg. It's called The Big Hack. It's a brilliant article how the Chinese have used tiny microchips to infiltrate America's top corporates. Now, the Americans have never officially acknowledged that the Zumwalt nor the British Duncan were under a attack, because that would mean that they will acknowledge that their defense equipment was weak. But they've acknowledged that they were under attack by corporate America was under attack. That they've acknowledged. You can see that article after article that the Chinese used tiny chips to hack into Amazon, Apple, etc. Exactly the same thing happened with the warships as well, but the Americans have never acknowledged it. The result of all of this is that the US has, along with the rest of the world today, has banned Huawei and ZTE. So this ban in 17 actually just started with Huawei's ban, and you must have heard so much that the Huawei COO is now in Canada. She's not allowed to travel. Huawei is banned. So all of this was happening, but we just thought that it's an economic thingy between two powers. But the reality is that the big hack was because the Chinese had hacked into American corporates. Not just that, they had hacked into American Defense Department as well. So the ban started, and you can see that the ban happened. The ban got extended, and what I want to show you are articles that suddenly, very recently, till about 18 and now 19, the ban has got extended to not providing Huawei any microchips as well. Okay, the US wants to starve Huawei of chips. Semiconductors are a weapon in the US-China trade war. Can the chip make? TSMC is the world's largest chip maker. So let me explain to you. Huawei is like the front for the Chinese government. Okay, it's just, let's say it's just a front for the Chinese government. The Americans have banned Huawei. Fine, as a corporate you have been banned, but what they've also done by invoking the Enemy Act is that they have said that three countries provide microchips. No country will provide Huawei with microchips as well. Now that is serious, which I will show you in the next few slides. Why is that serious? First of all these countries in red have banned Huawei. India has also banned it now. And so have Australia, Japan. Germany has also gone and banned it, or at least very recently said that we will not allow it. So the whole world is starting to come together for banning Huawei. But more importantly, when you ban a country from access to microchips like China and tell Huawei no access to microchips, I want to show you what that means. Finally, it is about money, economics, and power. The ban on microchips to Huawei is this. In 2017, this bar, you can see that the semiconductor market size for the Chinese was $250 billion. Basically, their market size for microchips is so large, it's $250 billion in 2017. Today in 2020, that requirement is $300 billion. It's more, China imports far more semiconductor products than any other country in the world. So much so $300 billion of semiconductor import is bigger than their oil bill. It's bigger than their oil bill. So while they were busy building infrastructure to make oil travel easier, fact of the matter is that by not having microchips, it's a very, very massive impact on their economy. And I will show why. 60% of all semiconductor consumption happens by China. So the rest of the world is 40%, but 60% of all semiconductors are used by China. And it is so obvious. Everything you touch, phones, laptops, electronic gadgetry, TVs, digital, everything that you touch, feel, see, everything today around us uses microchips. So it's very obvious that that demand, and if China is the factory to the world, it needs microchips. Now, the Chinese do make microchips, but the demand is so large that they need access to it perpetually. And the Americans have banned the export of microchips to China. What that has meant is that $1.5 trillion worth of 5G rollout in 90 countries because of the Huawei ban is now under threat. In my opinion, and in the opinion of many, many researchers who are studying this very, very deeply, actually the Huawei ban and the subsequent ban on microchip technology is an existential crisis for the Chinese, because the demand is so large and they cannot cope up for production internally, that the ban means they cannot roll out $1.5 trillion of 5G rollout. 90 countries had signed for Huawei 5G, including India. Now, by 2030, Xi Jinping had this dream of becoming a technology superpower, overtaking the US. But if you don't have your 5G technology rollout, plus you don't get semiconductors, what it really means is that there is an existential crisis for the Chinese, because $1.5 trillion is serious economic impact. The reason for that basically is that China needs unrestricted access to fresh waters to make microchips. So the country is making microchips, but the demand will now expand so large, will become so big that they need fresh water to start making more microchips and more sophisticated microchips. Now we come down to why is it that the Chinese and the Indians are now at loggerheads? Because of an electromagnetic pulse that happened on Zumwalt, the fact is that we are under attack, because all the world's fresh waters are right here in Aksai Chin, Ladakh, and all the area that I showed you in and around Siachen, Shaksgam, Daulat Beg Oldi, Aksai Chin. This is where all the fresh waters originate. And now the Chinese need complete access to that area so that they can make microchips. Now I'm explaining this in very simple terms, but the fact of the matter is that the manufacturing capacity for microchips depends on two things. Tremendous amount of reservoir facility for fresh water. This is not fresh water. What you see, this is not fresh water. It's fresh water cannot be seawater, cannot be rivers. It has to be fresh waters, which are let's say glacial water, then treated further in massive amounts of reservoirs, along with sand to clean these chips such that they can be manufactured. And the sources of fresh water is right here, Indus, Jhelum, Chenab. Now, after this session is over, I want you to just read the number of dams that are being constructed today as we speak on the Indus, and tunneling that is happening between the Pakistanis and the Chinese. Literally $8 billion worth of dams are being built right in this area, and tunnels of 200 kilometers are being built on these rivers to tunnel the water to reach out here in the Taklamakan Desert. The point I'm just trying to make is complete, unfettered, unrestricted access to fresh waters is what the Chinese want, so that they can use that technology along with sand to make microchips. In Kashgar, some of the most sophisticated microchip facilities are starting to be built. And what has happened on the contrary, that India has constructed 65 strategic roads, one of which is in the entire Ladakh area, correct, all the way to Daulat Beg Oldi. Actually, India is now stopping that access to fresh waters. So which is basically meant that Shyok, Darbok, all of these are Indus tributaries. We have built infrastructure right around that. And so in many ways, the Chinese don't get unrestricted access to waters. Having said that, they're still building dams. You'll be surprised to know this, that there are 55,000 dams in the world. 26,000 dams are just in China. It's the most dammed nation in the world. And today, literally in the last few years, they've been heavily damming this area along the Indus at a cost of $8 billion. It has massive ramifications for Indian downstream villages. Plus, they're tunneling away this, after building huge reservoirs, they're tunneling it away so that they can build microchip facilities. Now, all of this that I'm talking to you is again is part of lots of research, but in the public domain. And the point I just wanted to end with is that we are in the new phase of wars. The new war is not necessarily about bullets. It is actually cyber war, which has happened. Some of our institutional setups have come under attack. Some banks have come under attack. But in Australia, the cyber war is full on. Their power plants were attacked. You can see that the Chinese used electromagnetic pulse on USS Zumwalt. That is under attack. It's all about water, construction of dams. That is happening. It's all economics. It's not politics. These are trade wars. In many ways, microchips is the new oil for China. And to that extent, access to building microchips and creating that infrastructure is one of the biggest reasons why today we are at loggerheads with them. So while we've always been at loggerheads with them on different issues, but the latest reason and the biggest reason today is for this, access to fresh waters. So I'm going to stop here for a while. It's been about an hour since I've been speaking. I do have a separate section, which is on a completely very, very critical piece, but I will stop here and take questions if anyone has. And if need be, then I'll go into the section around terrorism. So I can open it up for Q&A. And I'll keep my slide share on for a while so that in case I need to refer to any maps.
So I guess we have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Agnel, you want to take it through?
I'll also start.
So,
Help me out, that'll be great.
in the meantime, Karan, do you have access to the Q&A box?
I do. I'm trying to, yeah. So let me just see if I can read a few questions. So here goes. Let me just read.
Sure.
The question that's come from Umesh. His question is, China has been in conflict with 16 countries. They are the largest, they can be the largest buyers of arms and ammunition for USA. Why is the US always in conflict with China? So actually there are two questions in this one thing, Umesh. I think what you're trying to say is China is in conflict with 6 countries and they can be buyers of arms. And why is the US at conflict with China? Come to think of it, the US-China conflict only came in very recently. ये तो वो ट्रम्प आया है in last 4 years when he's gone berserk saying that we need our manufacturing back from China, we need our facilities back from China. Prior to that, the Chinese and the Americans were working close as if nothing is wrong. It's only in the last 4 years that this entire conflict has come in front of everyone. And this, it's so much so, and probably I'll talk about this a little later also, that today, the buyer of China, of American arms is South Korea and Japan. That has always been the case. But this conflict was not in the center. It was always about the American corporates working with the Chinese manufacturers. It's post-Trump that this has taken such a serious issue because he wants manufacturing back. On top of it, the Huawei issue. Again, and then you have had what has happened with the coronavirus. So please remember, this is brand new for the world. ये ऐसा नहीं है कि 30-40 साल से चल रहा है, ये very recent 4 साल में ये सब बाहर आया है. Let me just take a few other questions. Is there a similar map? I'm just finding it a little tough to read some of the questions. If you guys can help me, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I'll kind of touch upon some of them. Yeah. Could you cover a little bit on OBOR?
One
Belt and Road? Yeah,
Yeah,
one belt, one road.
one belt, one road. So, like I showed you that the entire infrastructure that the Chinese are building is the one belt, one road is like the new Silk Route. It's the Silk Route that covers China into Europe, and they build that primarily for the purposes of trade. And this is what it looks like. It starts from Beijing, ends at Turkey. While this, like I said, 163 countries are signatories to it, it does pass through Indian territory, which is why we've not signed it.
Right. There is one more question on the current escalation. Ritesh wants to know whether can it lead to a full-blown war. So is this border skirmish just going to be limited to that? And if it does lead to a full-blown war, are we well prepared? I mean, our army, navy, air force, are we prepared?
Yeah. So who asked me this question? Ritesh? Ritesh asked me this question.
Yeah, your ex-colleague Ritesh
Ritesh, your
Pathak.
ex-colleague. Ritesh
Oh,
Pathak.
hi Ritesh. Kaisa hai? Good to hear from you. We must connect after this call as well. So the question, Ritesh, uh, are we at war? We are at war with China. I'm going to give a very straight answer. We are at war with China. And please remember the definition of war has changed. The definition of war is not just bullets. It is, like I showed you all, that it is about, in many ways, this. It is many wars coming together. So let me answer this. We are now at war with China. We've lost 20 soldiers. 50,000 troops on either side are locked in battle. The Indian Air Force capabilities have now come on the forefront. The Indian Navy is at full battle gear. If this is not battle or if this is not war, then I really wonder what is. I am not trying to promote the concept of war. What I'm saying is 1999 also, the Indian Army lost 1,600 soldiers, and we had to, remove the intruders that had come. 1962, the war between India and China started in October, November. It started on exactly the same lines. So I'm just preparing all of you on the call that we're in the middle of a war. Has a bullet been fired? No. Have soldiers lost their lives? Yes. Are we at full battle gear? Yes. Can it become a kinetic battle? Yes. Will it start in Ladakh? The answer is probably no. It may not start in Ladakh. It may start in Taiwan. Because please remember that the real problem is this. This is the real problem. Taiwan is the biggest manufacturer of microchips in the world. And that has banned the supply to China. And the Chinese now are all set to attack Taiwan. Their logic is if they cannot get the microchips, they don't want anyone else in the world to get it. I'm not sure if you're aware, but there are 3 aircraft battle carrier groups of the Americans right now in and around Taiwan. Many things, if you start Googling, you will realize that the Defense Department of America is saying that we will protect Taiwan at all costs. So this battle may not start in Ladakh, it may start in Taiwan. 3 aircraft carrier groups means 250 aircraft and 70 battleships. And the real reason is out there. It may start here, but in my opinion, the world in many ways is already facing the new wars. Can we take the Chinese on? Absolutely yes. Because the terrain is in our favor, we've had 35 years of Siachen Glacier experience. This is not 1962. This time the government has gone all out. And more importantly, there's a massive shift in thought. The Indian way to deal with all of this was called strategic restraint. We've now gone into what is known as offensive defense. There's a big shift. And this time it has been left to the defense services to take their decisions. So I really think that we're in a very, very good situation. Sometimes a war is necessary for progress. So long answer to Nikesh's question.
Okay. So I'll combine a couple of these questions and try and make it easier.
Sure.
So on the part of economic policies and using economics as a means to coercive diplomacy, this is something which has been the Chinese method, right? I mean, you uh, indebt the country so much that it tries it becomes almost as submissive, as you rightly said, that Pakistan has become the 27th province or the 26th province for China. So, yeah, so is that actually dwindling? Because a lot of countries are now retaliating to that approach. If you see the whole of Africa, China raided the whole of Africa and supplied cheap Chinese debt and kind of indebted them into years of subjugation. So
Yeah.
is that reversing, number one?
Yeah.
And second, on the part of Quad, I mean the formation of Quad, how effective, or is it a substantial threat, or is it just a passing fad?
I want to talk about the Quad first. It is, again, it's a shift in the way India has approached its foreign policy. I'll talk about Quad and then I'll answer the other question, which is about Chinese debt. And there are some questions which are kind of similar. So let me answer the question on the Quad. The Quad, the first time Quad came into discussion was 2007. And it was just discarded as a, I mean, it was thrown out of the window by the political establishment in India at that point in time. Almost 13 years later, Quad has become not just about supply chains. It could very well be like a mini NATO by itself. So the formation of the Quad is a very, very serious development in the world, especially in our part of the world. And like I said, 13 years ago, that idea was mooted. It's coming, I mean, and now those agreements are coming together, and they will not just be about supply chains. Chances are that this may also become like a defense umbrella, where if one country is attacked, it is an attack on every other four countries. I must also share with everyone out here, Quad is not just four countries. It seems as if Vietnam, New Zealand, and perhaps Indonesia may also be joining the Quad. So it's becoming much bigger than what it was. That's on Quad. The other thing I want to speak about Quad is that there is a philosophical shift, or at least the first steps to a shift in the way India is looking at it. For decades, I have grown up, and many people on this call would have grown up on the words called non-aligned movement, NAM, which is a Nehruvian way of looking at foreign policy or India's strategic interest. Non-aligned meaning हम किसी के साइड के नहीं है, ना हम कोल्ड वॉर में सोवियत यूनियन के साइड पे है, ना अमेरिका, हम अपनी दुनिया खुद चलाएंगे. So there were three countries, Egypt, Yugoslavia and India. We said we are non-aligned. But abhi Cold War bacha nahi. Soviet Union has become Russia. And yet in 2020, we are still looking at non-alignment as a possible theory. No, I think the big shift is now no longer is India looking at non-alignment alone. Now we're beginning to take sides. I think that's the big shift that has happened. And I think that's again irking the Chinese. We're now beginning to take sides. Even when we are taking sides, it's quite interesting that foreign policy has come out beautifully. I'll tell you why. We are buying defense equipment from the Americans. For example, the Chinooks and some sophisticated aircraft. I mean, you can see that the cooperation between America and India has gone up. But simultaneously, we've also got approvals to buy S-400 missile technology from the Russians. Okay, that is by far never happened before. We are buying Israeli technology, drone technology. We're buying drones from the Israelis. We are now getting into the Quad with these four countries. The UAE and Saudi Arabia both are now siding more with India. They've given the highest public recognition to the Prime Minister of India. So you can see, barring only China and Pakistan, we seem to be, building a coalition as India being at the center in our part of the world, along a very, very good coalition. And yet, while we are taking sides, we seem to be working with many, many countries simultaneously. It's very important to understand this big shift that while we may not be non-aligned anymore and are taking sides, but the foreign policy is coming through beautifully in our favor. So that's on the Quad. The other question was about debt and the Chinese program to buy these countries out. That is true, which is why Sri Lanka, and there's a question out here on Hambantota port. do the Chinese still own the port, and can that be harmful? The Chinese do not own the Hambantota port any longer. They've been asked to stop any work there. So countries which realized that when they take this debt on, they're actually giving away their land, they're giving away their country itself, have stopped all work. For example, Sri Lanka, Burma, in Africa, they've done lots of construction. Djibouti port is one such place where they've done construction. Many countries are realizing and are coming out of it. Clearly, there is one country which is going deeper into it, which is Pakistan, because Pakistan could not even pay back $1 billion loan to the Saudi Arabians and had to go running to China to pay that loan. So it's the world starting to realize it, but clearly one country is wanting not to think of it.
Right, Karan.
I,
A few questions are there on. Sorry.
I will take this question, if you don't mind, from Nilesh Thakur. This is
Please.
one-liner. So we'll come to the others. If you don't mind, can I take this?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so is coronavirus an attack from China, and is something related to? Is it related to economics? It's a very important question. I want to answer this. So there is no proof. There is no hard proof that suggests that coronavirus was a bioweapon yet. We don't have that proof. The world is. So what is Trump doing? What is Prime Minister Modi doing? We are saying that China unleashed a virus, but did not do it intentionally. They did not inform us in time, and they did not take precautions, etc., etc. Very recently, this whole argument has started that was it intentional? It seems as if, at least for now, doesn't seem intentional. If it is a bioweapon, then let me tell you what happens in that case. If it is proven to be a bioweapon, which is what Trump is now starting to claim, or at least saying that this is a Chinese virus or whatever, if it happens to be a bioweapon, then there is a economic angle. Let me explain what happens in that case. Just like the Huawei ban happened under the Enemy Act, chances are, then this is something I've read and you can verify that. If this happens, then what happens is that the US will invoke the Enemy Act on China, and everything that the Chinese own, starting with treasury bills of the American government, will become null and void. By definition, $1.5 trillion of debt that the Chinese own will become zero. That's how big the economic impact can be. So if it gets proven to be a bio attack, I think the Chinese economy will lose another $8 trillion of American debt. It's massively serious.
hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Karan, this is Sri Kumar from Kolkata.
Hi.
It was a wonderful presentation, and on a very lucid manner, you have given the entire vital points of India and China. My question is very simple with respect to One Belt, One Road. That if these three undisputed areas in One Belt, One Road, and now India is claiming all these three areas are of them. Actually, it is not, India is not now claiming. If you see the manifesto since 1980, they are claiming that these parts are of the Indian integral part, okay, of the present government. So the war is to be there, because if they are claiming that these three areas are ours and One Belt, One Road is going through this, so don't you think that the war is inevitable? It will happen, whether direct war or indirect war. Second, with respect to Nepal, okay, that is also a very crucial part, because now Nepal is inclining towards China. So how far Nepal factor is affecting India ties with China as of now?
So it's thank you for your kind words on the presentation. On the issue of manifesto and political, लिखा पढ़ी वगैरह, 1980s तो छोड़िए, ये शायद 1960s से ही लिख रहे होंगे, बट किसी पॉलिटिकल एस्टैब्लिशमेंट ने 370 तो नहीं हटाया था अब तक. So आपको युद्ध करने की तो जरूरत भी नहीं है. You can actually have started internally by just removing some very basic restrictions that were applied on this nation. That in itself was not done. The point I'm making is you can write what you want to on your manifesto, but till you don't implement it, it does not occupy any relevance, which is exactly the point I was making, that while the three areas were disputed, but we were so busy dousing the fires in Kashmir because our establishment it didn't matter to them whether 370 hata ya nahi hata. We were kept busy just fighting Kashmir by the Chinese. Now, when the establishment says, Ki, nahi, I want to sort out these matters and I'm serious about it, that's when you start questioning, that's when you push back the Chinese, and that pushback is not acceptable to them. So now what is happening is, to your own question, the manifesto mein jo likha hai, wo abhi implement ho raha hai. Will it lead to a war? Possible. That is a possibility. I don't want to, mince my words out here. It seems as if we could get into a conflict. Yes. Next question on Nepal. Nepal, people say, is heading the Pakistan way. Actually, that's not true. Nepal is headed another way altogether. They will head probably the Tibet way. They'll just be occupied. They will become an occupied country. It's a very dangerous political game that the Nepalese are playing. And this is nothing to do with economics yet. It's just to be in power. But the result is that they may not remain a country. They may just become, like Tibet, part of Pakistan physically, part of China physically. So I just hope that doesn't happen for their own benefit.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Let me just see if there are any other. So there's this. What role is Russia playing? And this is a great question. I wanted to answer that. Yeah. So this is a question that I just read out there. What is the role the Russians are playing? Now, this is very important. It's very important for us to understand the background. There were two powers in the world, 60s, 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s. There was the Cold War, the Soviet Union and the United States. Okay. So the two were at war, so to speak, Cold War. And in the 80s, the Soviet Union disintegrated, 90s, and then that became Russia. And so there was Russia, there was Uzbekistan, etc., etc. So in many ways, the world thought that this Cold War has come to an end. Yes and no. The world thought that the Cold War has come to an end, but the Chinese did not think that the Cold War has come to an end. 30 years, they've taken the Cold War, the gap that has got emptied by Russia, the Chinese put themselves in that, and they, over the last 30 years, started building that. Now that the Americans' new counterpart will be China. That actually has come out only in the last 4 years, but they've been building for it for the last 30 years. And the way the Russians have played it is very beautiful. What they've done is they've used China to counterbalance America, and they've used India to counterbalance China. So the world is like a little complicated. The Russians have played it very nicely over the last few decades. They've used China to counterbalance America and India to counterbalance China. But in our relationship with the Russians, we continue to get support. Like I said, we'll continue getting military equipment. See, what are we asking for? In the case of a battle, मान लीजिए कुछ युद्ध हो जाता है. Are we expecting Americans to send soldiers to us? No. Are we expecting Russians to send soldiers? No, not at all. We don't want boots on the ground. What are we expecting? We are expecting that when we require some material, when we require a machine, when we require an aircraft, the supplier should give it to us. And to that extent, our relationships with both Americans and the Russians seem okay for now. That if slightly longish answer, but I wanted to answer this. It's an important question on Russia. Okay, what else? That's an interesting one. So this Sagar has asked me this question. Medieval history between 800 to 1300 AD, pre-British, pre-British, did India ever exist as a country? We are a region of several states. So Sagar, I'm both happy and sad that this question has come up. Happy because I'm putting together slides on this, maybe in a separate, maybe next month sometime, whenever you guys have the time. I have slides on this very question, that what was India all about. And I'm sad also because in your question, it seems as if you are wondering whether India was a country. India was not a country in that area that you mentioned. No, it was a continent, because the area of influence went all the way from literally Middle East, Afghanistan, Indian subcontinent, all the way into Indonesia. And which is why you see so many references to Lord Ganesha, Vishnu, Ram, not just in India, but as far as out as Indonesia. Chandragupta Maurya's kingdom extended all the way to Indonesia. Now, so I don't want to get too deep into this, but I'm myself putting slides so that people realize the size and power that India enjoyed at one point in time. Yeah. Any other question? And we can take one or two last questions, and after that we can call it a day, because I've taken so much of your time.
No, everyone is really enjoying this. I'm
Okay.
getting a lot of messages on my mobile.
Okay.
So
Whatever works
awesome.
for you, I'm happy to maybe answer one or two, because I don't want to take too much time. But whatever.
Umang, any relevant questions?
Yeah, one second. So I think the other questions are largely on, is Kashmir a distraction? I think you've talked about that. Questions on CPEC, and I think one economic and one interesting thing is that is this China plus one a reality? I think that will help a lot of us, and get your views on that, and how far we can benefit from this entire China plus one theory which is going around, and can we actually make the most of this, and are we prepared to encash this, or will this just be yet another missed opportunity?
So, I'm assuming what you're really asking is how will Indian establishment react to things like Tibet, Taiwan, and Hong Kong? Because that's the crux of the China plus policy.
No, I'm talking about this global manufacturers looking for an alternative manufacturing, China plus one.
Correct. Actually, you're talking about that. Okay.
The economic part of it, yeah.
So the biggest shift, and I think a lot of people on this call should read up what's happening on there's a technical term for it, and it's the plus one is what is called the resupply line to the world. So the Quad, the Japanese, the Australians, and the Indians, these three countries are coming together to create resupply lines, hence brand new manufacturing, hence an alternative to the Chinese manufacturing. And let me explain, let me share with all of you who has been the biggest beneficiary of this. It's actually been Vietnam. Vietnam in the last 10 years has signed 13 trade agreements with every part of the world, and has literally taken away a lot of manufacturing, even as there has been conflict. And please remember, please look at Vietnam's history. They fought a war with the Americans, and the last battle the Chinese ever fought was in 1979 with Vietnam, and they lost that battle. So Vietnam has come through with an entire history of battles and wars, and in the last 10 years has signed 13 trade agreements, and is one of the biggest beneficiary of supply lines. If they could do it, can you imagine what the Quad can do? And so one of the big benefits. So the reason for India not becoming an FDI hub has not been anything else but the fact that we were the biggest importers of terrorism in the world. I want to answer this with this just one very quick thing I want to show all of you. It's very important because it's a critical component. I've done a lot of research on terrorism, and I'm just going to show you one slide. our number one security issue was terrorism. It actually has cost us 1.5% GDP for the last 20 years because we were considered a risk nation. So when you are a risk nation, no one wants to come and put infrastructure. And we've had 6,024 attacks in the last 24 years. In the last 20 years, 6,000 attacks. That's one attack a year or one attack a day. It's that big, the cost of terrorism. So when you ask me questions around manufacturing and will India become a hub to the world, of course it will, provided it becomes a safer nation. And the biggest change in the last 6 years has been that from 2014 to 2020, not a single terror attack, barring Pathankot and Uri. So it was not on civilians, but it was on defense establishments. In the last 6 years, we've not had a single attack, terror attack, basically thereby meaning that FDI and FII flows, what the current political diaspora is trying to do is to make India a safer destination. So that FDI comes in and you can put plants. The reason was not that, I mean, of course, there was a reason, like, for example, we weren't very, very friendly with our rules, but the bigger reasons were we were unsafe. So to answer your question, can India become the biggest hub for manufacturing over time? Yes. Can Quad help in that? Yes. Is there an example to show that this has happened? Yes. Vietnam. Is India becoming more secure? Yes. 6 years, no attack. So all of this is starting to come together in very beautifully today.
Great. I think that helps. There are still a lot of questions which probably are not directly related, but some of the more economical impact questions are interesting. That Harshal Choksi wants to know whether Chinese companies increasing stakes in corporates across the world. So the distress buying which started, some time back, and that massive fear was triggered when the People's Bank of China tried to get a stake in HDFC Limited at a very cheap price. So is that a material threat, and how real can that get?
The 0.1% here and there is not material, so it's not something very, very significant. But I think the way you have to look at this is, the Indians went and banned like whatever 50, 60 apps and TikTok, etc. When the Americans tried doing that, they were pushed back by their judiciary, and so they're still dealing with that. But you see what has happened as a result of that. Now, suddenly, every day there are articles where many parts of the world are coming together and actually becoming much more, they're becoming much more vocal in their anti-China views. So what I want to share with everyone on this call is that there's a very big chance, and this is something that I'm out of research and my own, when after speaking to so many people, there's a chance that there may be a regime change in China. That Xi Jinping may actually have gone beyond the mandate. See, up till BRI, that was fine. You take on 15 countries, fine. On top of it, you take on the world, assuming with a virus, okay. Then you take on the Americans, then you take on the Indians. Now, basically what they've really realized is that Xi Jinping may actually be economically very harmful for their future. From what I'm beginning to read and listen to people, there is a big possibility of a regime change itself in China. And that may actually become a reality. Because the Chinese have built this infrastructure for the next 100 years. They don't want to give it up.
I think you spent a considerable amount of time. I think we need one more session on the subject you were talking about. On behalf of the entire MOFSL group, Karan, thank you so much. Honestly, we all know about the issues on our borders, both the western and the eastern side, but nobody really wants to go deep to understand what's the trouble, and everybody's so busy in their own lives that government will take care, the soldiers will take care, etc., etc. But I think in this presentation, I mean, it's been an eye opener for all of us, understanding the maps, some of the sensitive issues which came out. But eventually, I think the way you beautifully, constructed and actually brought it to the economy or the economic impact, which is leading to all these kind of disputes and not really Kashmir or all these kind of things, and that Pakistan is completely irrelevant. I think this whole microchips leading to all this whole, drama, what is happening, it's eye opener, honestly, and it's one of the best presentations. The way you spoke, it was so easy to understand everything, and I am getting a lot of compliments, honestly, and so thank you once again for this, Karan. Appreciate it. And we have people from different companies within the group. So we have a lot of wealth managers, we have AMC guys, we have people from the retail broking distribution. Within some of the seniors like Ajay Menon and all are also there. So again, on behalf of everyone, thank you, Karan, once again for this. And God bless you. Take care of yourself. Stay safe.
Thank you, Karan. Thank you so much.
We have the recording. We'll share the link with you, and we will share the link with everyone. So we had a constant participation of 230 people, and it maintained even in the Q&A round, which itself speaks a lot. So great. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that you gave me an opportunity and, to hear me out. And the nation is in safe hands. That's what I like to end with.
Absolutely. We get a lot of confidence.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Karan.
Karan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Sure.